It's that time in May when people start talking about that movie from the 80s, the one with James Earl Jones as the villain. Came out in May 1982. That's right. Once again, we must ask, Conan, what is best in DevOps? To crush CI/CDs, to see supply chains before you, and to hear the attestation of their S-bomb. Which means, this week we talk with Ray Bango from Veracode about why developers need to think differently about software security and how developer background can inform security thinking. In the news segment, bad ALEC bugs make faith in IoT disturbing. A gatekeeper bypass is all too easy. Kerberos flaws are altering the deal. A new Spectre-style attack is impressive. Most impressive. And more. Alert your Star Destroyers and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. It's the show to learn the latest tools, techniques, and processes necessary to understand DevOps, application security, and cloud security. Your trusted source for the latest application security news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. We're proud to announce CISO Stories, a new podcast series in partnership with Cybersecurity Collaborative and Cyber Reason. CISO Stories features the candid perspectives and experiences of frontline senior security executives and dives deep into timely security topics. CISO Stories is hosted by Todd Fitzgerald, VP of Cybersecurity Strategy at Cybersecurity Collaborative, and Sam Curry, Chief Product and Security Officer at Cyber Reason. Listen weekly as they speak with extraordinary CISOs by visiting securityweekly.com/CSP. Cloud native development presents new challenges for security teams. Ephemeral workloads are scattered across services, and it's hard to identify resources, monitor configurations, and ensure compliance. Prisma Cloud by Palo Alto Networks is a comprehensive cloud native security platform, delivering full stack protection for multi and hybrid cloud environments. It provides deep visibility, threat detection, and data security, as well as protection for hosts, containers, and serverless while enforcing policy guardrails. Visit securityweekly.com/Prisma Cloud to gain control over your cloud security.
This is episode 149, recorded May 3rd, 2021. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Hey there, happy Monday, how are you?
Happy Monday, doing well. And I'm also curious if anyone has a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows. Submit your suggestions for guests by completing the form at securityweekly.com/guests. We read suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Our next
Mike, Mike, I'm going to interrupt for a second. I'm a little biased on this, but I just would love to see Weld Pond on the podcast. Just saying, just a little biased.
There we go. We've got foreshadowing from who our guest is, foreshadowing another guest. So we're going to have to take that note. So Weld Pond coming up. But also, Ray, hang in there because you have to find out about our next technical training that's going to be on May, Revenge of the 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern. It's going to explore common misconfigurations of Nginx, the damage they could do, and how to avoid them. After that, see how attackers gain access to endpoints and learn defensive strategies to protect against those attacks in our May 13th technical training, also at 11 a.m. Eastern. Register now at securityweekly.com/webcasts. If you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical trainings, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And as our listeners just heard, we have Ray here with us, who is a security practitioner and tinkerer. After spending nearly 30 years in software development, he got the crazy idea to switch to security. Ha, the fool. Now he focuses on helping developers build more secure software at Veracode with some people like Weld Pond. Hello, Ray. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. And you said that so well. And you teed me up so nicely. And yeah, I can't believe I switched into security. I was doing so great in software development and got this crazy idea that security was a thing. And yeah, I found out real quick that it's a thing.
It is a thing. And I want to dive into, developers thinking about security, but let's actually rewind a little bit and talk about your background as a developer. You must have spent quite a long time there. And but before, tell us a bit about that development background. How were you exposed to security during that time? And what made you jump the fence, so to speak, or just cross over onto the security side of things?
Sure. So my first job was in 1989. And back then, mind you, this is MS-DOS days. And so there was one, maybe two viruses out there that I can really remember. And security wasn't something that I even thought about because everything I was building was on a desktop. There was no interconnectivity or anything like that. There was just no internet at that time. And as I continued to evolve in programming and find new opportunities, there still wasn't that sense that security was a big concern. There was security within the context of networks, and you had IT admins who were clearly very vested in security and making sure their systems were safe. But things weren't connected. Even banks. I mean, banks had dedicated ISDN lines, and so there was no sense that security was, from an application perspective, was a big concern. I spent 10 years at Microsoft, and about, I'm going to say about 3 years ago, maybe 4, I had been leading the Edge developer relations team, and so I had been talking so long about cross-browser development that I really wanted to speak about something different, something that I felt developers could kind of make some choices about. And everybody had been talking about cross-browser development. I felt like, all right, this is a story that's been played already. And I started digging into application security, and I thought that's a good thing for me to hang my hat on. And I was really thinking of it within the context of, let's say, a fiscal year. This fiscal year, I'm going to talk about this within the context of web development, and it would be a good story. And as I dug deeper into it, I realized there's really a gap in terms of how developers think about security. Most of them just don't. I've been working with a lot of developers over the last several years just on different things, and security was never a topic that came up. I would go to developer conferences, and there was never a topic around application security. You had some folks like Adam Baldwin, who was running the Node.js security project, and he kept talking about security, but he's been in the business for a long time, and so he kind of saw what was happening, especially around the node world. But for the most part, I don't think most people really took security as a priority within their application development lifecycle. It was like, I need to build software, I need to get it out, and yeah, I'll take some steps here to sanitize inputs wherever I can. But for the most part, security wasn't a concern, and tool chains definitely weren't part of that. There was, as far as I remember, there was no SAST or SCA tooling or things like that. Fuzzing wasn't even a word that I knew until I got into security. So it was kind of a jarring thing. And the big thing for me that kind of really made me shift and say, I want to go into security full time when NotPetya hit. And then WannaCry subsequently after that. And WannaCry was kind of jarring because it locked out the national healthcare system in the UK. And patients were being turned away for things like cancer treatment and dialysis. And that was a big deal. I was like, what if this was my family? And I've talked about this before, and it still rings true even to this day that, God, what if this was one of my children? And what would I do if they couldn't get care because some miscreant decided that they wanted to lock up a hospital system? So I decided to switch over to security. I decided to invest my time and switch careers into helping build more secure systems, whether it's on the network level or, in this case now, looking more at the application stack and figuring out how do we help developers build more secure software.
Yeah, and I think part of how do we help them develop is that one of the tenets or one of the common themes of recent years, as we talk about DevOps, for example, is that shifting responsibility onto developers. So it's not so much even that they it doesn't have to be foremost on their mind, but if the security orgs are thinking, well, we need you to be more responsible for this, that's got to be a shift of some sort. And one of the things that stood out to me as you were talking just now is, where are the developers talking about this, or not talking about this for that matter, and developer conferences? That's actually kind of different, I think, than, in possibly a better way as we start to shift into this conversation to thinking about how do we get developers thinking about security. How many developers do we get coming to a security conference to hear another talk on XSS categorization or CSRF attacks versus bringing a security person over to a developer conference? It seems to me like going into dev conferences might be that theme of, let's go find out where the developers are and talk to them there.
That's a great point. And I liked something that you said. You said, how do we get developers to think about security? And there's something I really want to stress here. I don't think developers need to be security experts. And that's that's something that I think is a scary proposition for a lot of folks who've made an investment in becoming a software developer. Security is hard, and it's as hard as any programming that I've done in the past. And it's a big challenge, and not everybody wants to do that, and not everybody should do it. So I like the fact that you said we need to get them to think about security, and that's the stepping stone. And you're absolutely right. I think security companies in general need to go to the developer watering holes. They need to make greater inroads into the developer communities. They need to speak with developers face to face. They need to. One of my sayings, and I use this over and over, and people are probably sick of hearing it from me, is like, I like to shake hands and kiss babies. And what I mean by that is that I like to be boots on the ground at an event. I like to sit down with attendees, whoever it is, some random person, and just get to know them and have conversations, because that's how you get to know what's on their mind. It's really hard virtually sometimes to do that. So to me, when I'm able to do it in person, it's great. Unfortunately, now with COVID, it's been a real challenge. So thankfully, podcasts like this, Twitch streams, videos, video conferences have really opened up this capability. So we definitely now need to start looking at how do we get to the developer conferences and come up with topics that relate to what developers really want to hear. If you just go in there and say, hey, I'm going to do a talk about cross-site scripting or SQL injection and blah, 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 and you just go in with these really esoteric security terms, you're going to turn people off. You have to come up with topics.
Cross-site scripting. It's so exciting. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so you have to come up with topics that developers can relate to. And a lot of that has to do with how do you relate to them at the programming language level? How do you relate to them at the business value level? How do you relate to them at the deployment level? Things that matter to them, and then incorporate security into that conversation in some way. One of the things that I see a lot is, and this has kind of been spinning up lately, is a lot of talks related to, let's take, Juice Shop, and let's show all these vulnerabilities that can happen. But that's great. The problem is that you only have a short amount of time with your developer audience to really drive a point home. You can say all these things are vulnerable, but at the end of the day, these developers are probably going to say, wow, yeah, they're vulnerable. And then they're going to go back to their day jobs and forget exactly what you talked about. But if you narrow down that scope a little bit and really focus more on bite-sized chunks of things that could directly impact their workflow and impact their customers in some fashion, maybe it is just focusing on cross-site scripting. Maybe it is just focusing on SQL injection, and give a real world scenario where they can relate to, and then give them remediation options. I think that's where you're going to get value. That's where they're going to start saying, oh, I understand why I need to sanitize inputs. Oh, I didn't know I needed to sanitize XML. Oh, and so you can complement Juice Shop. You can point them to Juice Shop if you want to, but I don't think Juice Shop should be the central focus of a conference presentation, because it's just too short of a time, and the audience is going to they're just going to get lost. So
they're going to get lost, and they're going to lose that. Make it relevant to them is what you're saying. Why show them Juice Shop if you're talking about some developers working on iOS and Android code, shifted into the API focused aspects. And
right. Even today, there was an announcement about a Composer supply chain attack. And I don't know all the details yet about it. I'm still digging into that, but it'd be interesting to say, look, this is how a supply chain attack looks like. And let's break down what this Composer and packages supply chain attack looks like. And you break it down soup to nuts. And then you say, this is how it could impact you as a PHP developer. And you've brought in this code, and this is what happens. And then this is how you remediate it. But you've narrowed down the scope. You've narrowed it down to your specific audience. Let's say in this case might have been PHP developers. And you're bringing it up with a tool that's really, really critical to their success. And then you show them, this is how you solve the problem. And once you do that, I think developers will start taking an interest. Again, it doesn't mean they're going to be security experts, and I don't think they're going to want to. But you're going to get at least their interest, and you're going to make them think more critically about things like ingesting third-party code without truly understanding what the implications are.
Yeah, and I think the direction we're going here is talking about security training, and we haven't mentioned it yet. But the idea, going to bring us around to security champions as well, because one of the things you're describing is that one-to-many relationship. Here is a security person explaining some security topics, something that's relevant, a suite of remediation steps that are actually relevant to the code they're writing as well. So we're talking about Java. Let's have some Java solutions rather than PHP examples and PHP solutions. But one of the things that comes hard, as I see it in training and in champions, is that it's still kind of people focused, which makes it hard to scale. And to a degree, perhaps hard to do well in the long term. I've seen various successful and, for that matter, unsuccessful security champions programs. And it's one of those things that I have a feeling that a lot of people think they want or really want, but don't necessarily realize how to make it successful so that it lasts more than 6 months or so. So I'm curious, how have you seen either training or champions programs work? And what are some good ways to think about that, just in the sense of this is something that'll last for a long time?
Sure. Security champions is such a it's a term that is really picking up steam nowadays. I know it goes back for quite some time, but I've seen a dramatic uptick now in terms of that term being used to define almost like a solution to application security. I see it as one part of the application security solution. So having people who develop an understanding and develop a passion for security is great. And if you can nurture that, definitely do it. And those people will self-select. What will end up happening is, as you offer more security training, for example, like Veracode has security labs. And if you go there and you take the training, and all of a sudden that person becomes like this advocate for security, that you have somebody on your hands that you want to nurture, you want to get them more training. Why? Because the bulk of your team is probably not going to be interested in that level of security. But if you can get this person who can be the bridge between your business stakeholders, the security team themselves, and the development team, and they can kind of be the translator between all these different units, that's huge. That's a huge way of making sure that your projects are on track, because now everybody's particular priorities are kind of understood. At least I feel that way. In the security champions programs that I've seen that are effective, these people tend to be really good communicators. They definitely understand the security landscape. I won't say they're like super AppSec experts. They just understand security. They understand the importance of it, but they also really deeply understand the development side of that. And then they have a good way of communicating with the IT security people who have a super important job. I want to stress this to all developers, that the network security folks, what we call IT admins, they have an incredibly important job. They're there to protect you and the company, sensitive data. Their job is incredibly hard. And the saying goes that, an attacker only needs to be right once, while a defender needs to be right 100% of the time. And if you've ever wanted to see stress, work in a security operations center and see the stress that a lot of these defenders are under every single day. Their job is critical. And so I'm guilty of kind of thinking security is their job. Why do I have to focus on it? And it's not. It's a responsibility across the board. We all need to think about it. And I guess I'm in that privileged position now where I've switched over to security. I'm seeing it from the other side of the fence. So if you have a security champion that can understand the needs of the security professionals on the IT side, and then also understand the business needs and kind of bring everybody together, that's where you're going to succeed. But you have to get them training, and the training has to be continuously reinforced. It's not like, let's just send somebody out to a week of training and then they come back from that week and they still have a boatload of work to do and everything they learn just goes out the door. You can't, because practice makes permanent. That's the bottom line. If you go to a training class and you come back and you just don't practice what you've just learned during that week, I can guarantee you will not remember it. It's just not going to happen. And I know that because I'm talking from experience. I've gone to a training class, spent 6 days doing a training, and I haven't used what they taught me. And I can't remember a lot of the things that I was taught, which is sad. if we're making that investment, especially when it comes to several thousands of dollars, let's make sure that even if it's one person, that person you feel that might be the security champion, let's make sure that they have ample time, whether it's their 20% or whether it's 50%, they have time to actually implement some of the things they learned. And then also give them time to mentor other people.
Yeah, and you're setting up a great explanation about the importance of investing to support a champions program itself. One of the things that stood out is you were describing a little bit of kind of the responsibilities of that champion. Didn't hear, for example, any mention of they're going to be doing the code reviews all the time, secure code reviews. They're going to be the ones doing threat modeling all the time. I heard communication between security, so translating security issues, security concepts to the developer team, as well as business context. In that sense, that I'm going to expand on what you were kind of getting to there, but that idea that someone who understands the context, this is what we're building, and this is on the side of threat modeling what could go wrong that is specific to our application. So we're going beyond just the basics of OWASP top 10 about sure there's an injection problem that could happen here, cross-site scripting over here. That's just generic cruft. It's more about, these are some security boundaries we're here. If somebody grabbed this particular token, that would be game over. If somebody, we have this other assumption in this feature that a person has done these 3 steps in this workflow. But if you skipped 2 of those steps and got here, bad things can happen. So that's what I hear as well about the important capabilities of what this security champion is doing as you're describing it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Mike. The way I look at it is that I think if you're in a very mature organization, the likelihood of you having security champions with that level of knowledge is substantially higher. I try to think of it a little bit broader where you're dealing with like small to medium-sized businesses as well, where they may not have this very mature model and they need to learn. And so going back to your topic about, getting training and education, I think this goes hand in hand with having people on site who can kind of nurture the security champion to a level where things like code reviews are just part of their day-to-day job, where threat modeling is something that they actually learn. Remember, developers don't have that as a normal skill. It's not taught in any type of computer science course. Security in general is very anemic at the university level. You'll talk to professors and they'll tell you that, yeah, we have some courses here and there that kind of reinforce security best practices, but they're usually at the graduate level. So if you go into an undergraduate program, you're going to learn the fundamentals of computer science. You're going to come out of there being, a pretty okay programmer. You're still not business savvy, but you could probably hack some good stuff out. But in terms of the security side, that's where you're going to be lacking, and that continues on into the corporate world where security and development in many respects are viewed as cost centers. And so what ends up happening is that level of investment is substantially lower unless there is something that becomes a critical priority for senior leadership. And so you need to have somebody who's willing to make the investment in teaching security to your development team. You need to identify the people who want to self-select into becoming security champions. And then you have to further their education to the point where they can feel comfortable doing those code reviews and they can feel comfortable doing things like threat modeling. And also, you need to empower them to have those conversations with the security folks, the network security folks, the infrastructure folks. So that way they understand what does security actually look like. In many respects, it's probably good for the development team and the network administration teams to have regular stand-ups and have conversations about what's important to them. What are the priorities? To me, that just seems like normal. That should be normal monthly occurrences where everybody's just getting together to talk about the priorities and how those priorities fit into everybody else's grand plans. Because if you work in silos, it doesn't really make a difference whether you have a security champion or not. Bottom line is nobody knows what everybody else is talking about. So I think there has to be some education capabilities and, of course, some empowerment to make security decisions across the board.
So what have you seen there? Great. Oh, go ahead, John.
Sorry. That's interesting, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but I'm sort of I'm going to try and let's take this in a slightly different direction.
Go for it.
Or within the same direction, but what you're just saying, the way you're describing it, I think that's the way I used to think. And I don't think the shift here I'm about to make is significantly huge, but I'm really curious to see what your take on it is, especially with your employer. Should we be just purely offering education and trying to train these people and put, I've done I know you have to put the, 30, 60 coders into a room and spend the next 2 days talking about OWASP top 10, or do we try to meet them on their turf? And by what I'm thinking about that is, in a classroom, you're not that's not your native environment, right? They're used to being at a keyboard with an IDE and that type of thing with an assignment. So do we where does tooling fit in? This is where I'm going.
Yeah.
How can do we have to teach them every single thing in top 10, and as you were saying, how to do input standardization, all those type of things?
Yeah.
Or do we provide them tools that sort of helps point out that, or maybe even fixes it along the way, or catches, does a scan at check-in, or what's your thoughts around sort of that side of things?
No, that's a great question, John. And one of the things you'll know about me, and I just so you'll know, and I think I work really hard at this, is trying to be as genuine and authentic as possible. So as much as I love Veracode, and I can talk about their products and stuff like that, I try to be very cautious about that because I don't want anybody to feel like this is a Veracode commercial. I do believe tooling. Tooling is very important, and it is to me a massive complement to developer workflows, and it's a way of helping developers kind of bridge that lack of security knowledge that they have. And especially for those developers that don't want to be security experts. When you have good security tooling inside your pipeline, you have good static analysis tool, good software composition analysis tools, things that help you kind of identify common vulnerabilities or bad patterns that are known in the industry to lead to security issues. They're going to make your development substantially easier in the long run. Initially, and I've talked to a lot of customers at Veracode, initially there's pain because what ends up happening is when you first launch these tools, you're probably going to find a lot of stuff. And then you have to work to kind of prioritize what those things are. Are they prize 0? Are they prize 1, prize 2, prize 3? How does it impact your business? How does it impact business continuity? Are they things that need to be addressed immediately? And a lot of times it's going to be really bad things that you need to address immediately. But once you get into the rhythm of things and you get into the rhythm of normal scanning and addressing these as part of the traditional QA cycle, it just becomes part of your day-to-day work. And one of the things that Chris Ang mentioned to me, which really stuck, is that I start to wonder if security should just be considered bugs. I mean, there's no software developer I've ever met that wants to purposely ship bugs. And every time I've met a developer who has shipped a bug, there's two reactions. Either they're like, oh crap, I shipped a bug, or they're like, oh God, I shipped a bug, I have to fix that. Nobody loves to fix bugs, but ultimately they know that it's just part of their normal development workflow. So maybe we need to think of security issues as just bugs. And when we find them, they're just part of the QA cycle, and we have to go back and fix them. And then we also have to make a determination: do they break the build or not? That's a company decision more than, let's say, a tool vendor decision or a community decision. That's really up to the company's appetite for that type of stuff and what their goals are. But no, I don't think education is the only solution to this. I think education is critically important to helping certain people help guide the company and help guide their development groups down a secure path. And, like Mike mentioned, having people who can do code reviews and, threat modeling and understand what security actually means that's great. And that's where education definitely comes in. And then when you complement that with really solid tools in their CI and CD pipeline, I think you have a great virtuous cycle there.
Yeah, I think I wanted to poke around some more on that aspect of tooling, because to my mind, that's how we hit that aspect of scaling. Because once you start getting into, I'm going to say a few million, even before 1 million lines of code, that's pretty complex code base, especially in whether you're in the modern day of microservices and you have a whole bunch of different repos or one massive mono repo that you're dealing with. There's a lot of benefit that comes out of having tools. And to riff on that aspect where you said that security is part of the QA process, one of the things I love about fuzzing is that 99 times out of 100, a fuzzer is going to find a bug that's just a bug. That's something, it caused a stack dump. There's something bad that happened there, so it should be fixed. The catch here is figuring out priorities. And I think that maybe comes back a little bit to that conversation you were saying too about security champion. How do we prioritize this bug? Or should we just say all these security bugs are equal and they have to be fixed? Because I kind of tend to fall into the camp that a lot of security bugs are just kind of cruft that we could ignore. And sure, they were found by a tool, but it's never going to be exploitable, or it doesn't have, it's not part of a code path that's actually executed, or it's honestly just not as important as some of the other priorities that might actually be for feature sets needed by the application, or something that's more fundamental for an improvement within a software stack.
Yep, agreed. And I think tools will definitely help you with identifying some of those things. There's always going to be a certain level of false positives, maybe even false negatives.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, what you don't want is to have that situation where it is a real thing and you just haven't identified it.
Right.
And you have no visibility into it. And it goes even back into network security. How many times have you heard of companies who were compromised because they didn't have visibility into a machine that had been sitting in their network for, 10 years, 15 years, and nobody even knew about it. And it's just sitting there connecting to the internet. Nobody knew about it, but a threat actor found it. And so having visibility into what the vulnerabilities are in the threat landscape of your applications, that's an important thing. And hopefully some of these applications, these services that are out there, static analysis, software composition analysis, those types of services can help out.
Yeah, I think I want to riff off that as well, because you mentioned too, attackers only need to be right once and defenders need to be right 100% of the time. But if you have good visibility, great monitoring logs that are generated by events that are either fraudulent or things that shouldn't happen, that kind of switches that equation into the sense that attackers need to be quiet 100% of the time, and developers just need to be alerted 10% of the time. Or I might have messed that up a little bit, but I think you see where I'm going, is that you can push that so that attackers actually have to be a lot more careful, because they're going to trip those alerts and trip that monitoring that's been set up within the application itself.
Yep, that's a great thought, and I have to say I haven't given that thought in terms of the application space. And again, this goes back to me constantly learning about security, and this, I guess, reinforces that whole notion of having people in the developer space get more in tune with what security actually entails. So I'm glad you brought that up. Having good security is great, and having good monitoring is great. There's two things I'm going to say. First of all, I think most small to medium-sized businesses just don't have the level of maturity. I've seen this from data at Microsoft, that they just don't have the level of security maturity that even if they have monitoring, that they could catch a bad actor. It's not a failing of any of the software. It's just security involves so many moving parts that if you can't interpret the results of, let's say a good SIM or a good web application firewall, or how your CASB system is working, if you can't understand what all these things are doing, it's really hard to find the threat actor. And it just makes it very easy for somebody to start shifting into your networks, and you might not even figure that out. And then on the application side, it becomes even harder, because I haven't seen the monitoring capabilities, and bear with me because I'm still very new to the application monitoring capabilities. I'm not sure what's everything that's out there. But I know that network monitoring is much more mature. And so I don't know how that monitoring would play into the application space. I will say that as developers, we need to be much more conscious of this. And whether it's canaries in our code that can kind of flag things, we need to consider it, because as more companies start shifting into the cloud, and cloud infrastructure becomes inherently more resilient to the traditional network-based attacks, the application space is where threat actors are going to look at. They're going to poke around in your application. They're going to try to find the holes. I've taken a lot of offensive security courses, and so I know how threat actors think. And it always floors me how a small web shell can do a boatload of damage. It just, one line of PHP code, that's all I need. And guess what? I have the ability to launch commands on a web server. And I'm like, yeah, it's crazy scary. So
it's crazy scary, and a lot of times it points out too, you don't even necessarily need root to cause damage. You just need access to data, access to credentials, and those types of things. And you also need access to perhaps some good training or some conversations about application security, which is what we had a great chance to have you on and talk with us about, Ray. So, and I've enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This is an important topic to me. I'm one of the things I'm most grateful about is the fact that I feel reinvigorated about learning security. I tinkered with security many, many, many moons ago when I was, we're talking like Slackware Linux, and then I kind of gave up on it. Didn't think it was a big thing, but it always kind of piqued my interest. And then now I'm in it, and it's kind of reinvigorated my desire to get better at coding, understand better coding practices, and just be a good security practitioner.
Well, that's great. And especially coming out of the browser development, that's quite a rich area of vulnerabilities and security concerns. So it's great to see that you've come over to our side to learn more about security to bring it back to developers. So thanks once again. Also want to thank John for joining us. Thank everyone for listening. If you'd like to learn more about Veracode, visit securityweekly.com/Veracode. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.